Naz Reid is off the board for the Pelicans after re-signing with the Minnesota Timberwolves, but could the Pelicans even have afforded him? Could they get a guy like Brook Lopez, Christian Wood? I'll explain all of the options in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go!
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available right here on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Monday. We are barreling towards free agency for the Pelicans. The draft just happened. Thank you all for whoever tuned into the live show. We had over 1,200 different people tune in at some point over the 45 minutes we did, which is just an insane and incredible number. And I appreciate all the support. Your passion for the Pelicans is absolutely awesome. So if you want to know more, become an everydayer to Locked On Pelicans. Listen Monday through Friday. We're here completely free. No one else comes to you like this, breaking down everything you want to know about the Pelicans team really easy and on a daily basis. So we'll get more into Jordan Hawkins later in the week, but I wanted to shift gears here on this Monday and look at free agency because it's coming. And the Pelicans didn't make a big move during the draft. They were maybe rumored to. They definitely looked at doing that, and nothing ended up happening, and that's fine. So they'll make a big change in free agency, right? That's what we want to see, a big roster overhaul, something like that. Maybe, maybe not. And I'll explain why that is in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. So let's get just right on into it. So first and foremost, what are the Pelicans looking for as they try and finalize this roster? You know, are they looking for a big name? Are they looking for minor little tweaks? Or are they maybe not going to spend that much? The Pelicans did hint as much in their post-draft presser when Trajan Langdon said, you know, we like the roster. We aren't really looking to make big things. It might be just little tweaks around the edges. Langdon also went on to say that rim protection is another area that they've identified that they need help in. And we knew this going into the season. You know, other than health, which is the number one thing and always will be right now with this Pelicans team, what they needed more than anything else was simply some more three-point shooting and guys just to take more threes and some rim protection. Simple as that. This roster's okay otherwise. If they run everything back and they add both those things and you're just one of those with the draft pick of Jordan Hawkins, I actually think this team's in a good spot. So they need some rim protection. All right, so new starting center, right? Not necessarily. This likely isn't going to be a big name player. You know, right now they have one roster spot available. When you kind of run down the current roster, and this can change a little bit, you know, you have Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, Jonas Valanciunas, Larry Nance Jr., Dyson Daniels, Kyra Lewis Jr. You now have Jordan Hawkins there, Trey Murphy, Billy Hernangomez, Najee Marshall, Herb Jones, Jose Alvarado, EJ Liddell, who's on a two-way, but we think probably gets a roster spot at some point, maybe later on in the season. And then they have one open roster spot with that. Two, if you don't think EJ Liddell will make it at the end of the year, or maybe they could waive a guy and then kind of add him in. They also could do something with Billy Hernangomez and have him gone. And this assumes that the team isn't re-signing Josh Richardson, not re-signing Jackson Hayes, and is waiving Garrett Temple. So basically, if you factor in EJ Liddell, one roster spot. They also have about $8.5 million until they hit the luxury tax. So the way the NBA works is there's two ways you go about free agency because there's a soft cap in the NBA. There's a soft cap, then an apron, then a second apron, and a full-on hard cap number, more or less. You operate as a cap room team you operate as a team with cap room or an above the cap team. The Pelicans are operating as above the cap team. They're over the salary cap. So they technically don't have like cap space to spend in free agency. And when you're an over the cap team, you use something called exceptions. If you've ever heard someone say mid-level exception, that's what this means. And there's actually three versions of the mid-level exception. There's a cap room mid-level exception, a non-taxpayer mid-level exception, and a taxpayer mid-level exception. And we'll get into that here in one more second. There's also another exception called the biannual exception. Technically, draft picks are exceptions too. Veteran minimum contracts are exceptions. And that's how you can sign players when you're over the soft cap, is you only do it through exceptions. If you're a cap space team, well, you just can give your money out however you want. There's only, by the way, 7 cap space teams in the NBA this season. Free agency doesn't really exist like it once did. So they have about $8.5 million until hitting the luxury tax. So because they're over the soft cap, that means they're using, most likely, not guaranteed, but most likely if they want to use let's say that you want to use $8 million, give themselves $500,000 as wiggle room. You're going to need to use the non-taxpayer mid-level exception to be able to do that. Simple as that. And now what that's going to do, especially if they, spend more than it, because it goes up to about $12 million, $12.5 million is what the first year you could sign someone to on a max non-taxpayer mid-level exception deal. If it puts them into the luxury tax, if they even just use this in the first place, they are hard capped. And that means you just can't go above a certain amount. It's actually not a big deal. People freak out about a hard cap. It doesn't really do much because the Pelicans wouldn't get to that hard cap number anyway. So essentially, this means they have about $8.5 million to spend. You don't need to know all the nerdy CBA salary cap stuff. They have about $8.5 million to spend. More or less, that's really going to be it when you factor in the roster spots that they have. So essentially what that means is they're limited in free agency. Naz Reid just went for an average of, it was like $14.5 million. The Pelicans, as they are right now, literally had no way to sign him to a contract of that size, other than a sign and trade, which we'll get into in a minute. But just in terms of being like a free agent, they couldn't have afforded that. We'll get into Brook Lopez in a moment here too, because I know that's a name that everyone is asking about. If he's going to get $20 million, If there's any player getting more than $8.5 million in free agency as of right now, for the most part, Pelicans have a little bit more room than that. The team, they probably have about actually 10 if you take out EJ Liddell on that stuff. A little bit more. They're in that range, but still, if they want to sign him, that's kind of what you're looking at. So if they want to spend more than, say, $8.5 million, because that's the room to the luxury tax, and that's arguably the most important part, they need to not get anyone more than that. So someone making $15 million, they couldn't do that anyway. Someone making $12.5 million, that puts you into the luxury tax. And is that something that the team wants to do? Is that something the team is willing to do? And we don't know the answer to that yet. So I have some realistic, cheap names for you that are massively unsexy. I want to talk about Drew Eubanks, who I think is a great option for the Pelicans in free agency, not as a signing trade. We'll get to that in the third segment because, look, I said Drew Eubanks on here. And are you excited that I said that? No. And I understand that. So today, it's a Monday. Let's give y'all what you want. Sign and trade targets for them to be able to get a big name. Let's look at guys like Brook Lopez, Christian Wood, and a couple of others, and what that might look like, and likely why that's not really going to happen. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Before we do that, though, today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by eBay Motors. eBay Motors is where I get all of the parts for my cars, and I work on all of my cars, including one that's almost 50 years old. I want to keep that thing running. I like cruising around in it. It looks cool, but it needs a lot of parts because it's all old. And so when I am working on the car, I need the parts to fit. Otherwise, it doesn't drive. Otherwise, it's just sitting there, and that's not good for your vehicle at all. You want it driving. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure every part you need fits just right the first time around. You just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. After all, with 122 million parts to choose from, you're going to be back driving in no time. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices over at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday for y'all, breaking down everything you want to know about this Pelicans team, completely free. No hot takes. We're just looking at what's going on with the team and analyzing it. And that's what we do here at Locked On Pelicans. So become an everydayer and know what's going on with this team, whether that's trade targets, what they might do in free agency, and just the options available to them. Listen Monday through Friday. And if you also want to support the channel, comment down below on YouTube. I'm even on the road in a hotel room and I'm doing this. Brought my mic and everything here with me so that we don't miss an episode, don't take breaks, anything like that. I was up at 5 a.m. I'm recording. It is now 9:45 at night, and I am tired. But it's okay, because I actually am excited about the show and talking about the Pelicans here and what they might do in free agency. So when I talk about free agency, if you put it out there on Twitter, when I talk to friends and people, number one question, this is the number one thing. Can they get Brook Lopez? Can they get Brook Lopez? This is a name that, in a sense, yeah, it's kind of perfect for the Pelicans. I mean that. It's just kind of perfect for the New Orleans Pelicans. This is a rim-protecting big man that shoots threes. His career has been super interesting to watch and watch it evolve. He didn't really shoot threes until his 7th, 8th, 9th year in the league, something like that. That is insane to me. Yeah, 9th season is when he finally started shooting 3-pointers. That's nuts. He finally did it in his final year in Brooklyn. And then he all of a sudden just was like, oh yeah, I'm going to start blocking even more and more and more and more shots. And he did. And he also rebounds well. And he's just the ideal center in the modern NBA. 7 feet, rebounds, blocks shots, and can space the court. He's a unicorn type of player. These guys don't really exist much in the NBA. So when people are like, I want to find a center that shoots threes and spaces the court, that's way easier said than done. And so, yeah, he's a perfect fit next to Zion Williamson. An absolute perfect fit next to Zion Williamson. And I don't think the Pelicans have a chance at getting him. He's going to get more with another team than what the Pelicans could offer. They have $8.5 million to spend, let's say. If he gets a $20 million deal, how do you make that work? Only way you can do that is a sign-in trade. Okay, let's play this out. And this comes from, I got a DM about this as I was already planning on talking about it, so it's kind of perfect timing. Let me pull you up so that I can shout you out. It is sneaky, at Mish L. Jude, MICHLJUDE. He's got his tweets are protected, so you might not be able to go and see him. Asked me about a sign and trade with the Pelicans for Brook Lopez and Jonas Valanciunas and future picks and maybe players. So let's say Brook Lopez is going to get a 3-year, $60 million deal at $20 million a year. You can make this trade work fairly easy for New Orleans in a sign and trade. He signs that deal, comes to New Orleans. Pelicans send out Jonas Valanciunas, who's making $15 million this year. I haven't put the numbers into a trade machine yet, but to add the salary to it, that's super easy to make that work if you need to. So here's the thing. If the Pelicans are going to offer him that, do you think the Milwaukee Bucks wouldn't? They absolutely would. They can't let him walk for nothing. They know that they need to resign him and Chris Middleton and know that it might hurt them long term. And we'll get into that part in a second. So if Milwaukee's like, yeah, we'll offer you 3 years, $60 million, $20 million a year, you really think he's going to pick New Orleans over the Milwaukee Bucks and with Giannis? Heck, they might even offer him more knowing how essential he is. And here's the other part of that. If they're going to let him walk, do they really want to replace his salary necessarily with $15 million of Jonas Valanciunas? Valanciunas isn't a court spacer, though he shoots the 3 ball at times well. But you need court spacing with Giannis. So I just don't think that makes sense. They can go, no, we're not going to sign and trade you there. Good luck. Go pick another team because they don't have the cap space to sign you. And they can all of a sudden start playing hardball. And so New Orleans would need to give up a number of picks, I think, to be able to make it worthwhile to the Milwaukee Bucks. Then that's if Brook Lopez is just like, I am not going back there at all, and I just don't see that being the case. So yeah, Brook Lopez is the sexy name, but I don't think there is really any realistic scenario where he comes to New Orleans, but who knows? So let's look at another name that would need to be a sign and trade. Christian Wood from the Dallas Mavericks. And I have one word on that one. No. I get it. He puts up numbers formally here. Maybe they should have kept him, maybe not. Look, there's something about this dude that just wears out his welcome with teams immediately. They soured on him so quickly in Dallas after being kind of the big acquisition for them this past season in the offseason before they got to Kyrie Irving. Everyone seems to hate this dude. No, it just doesn't make any sense. We got 2 more names here in the sign and trade category. Jakob Poeltl of Toronto. Toronto's just not going to let him go. He isn't going to end up coming to New Orleans. They traded a first-round pick that's likely to convey for him 2 first-round picks maybe. and they're going to just re-sign him. You know, he's probably the best of all the old school centers out there, but he doesn't shoot threes. He doesn't space the court really. You know, he's more of a down low, like old school type of center. You need court spacing. At that point, don't give up assets and just keep Jonas Valanciunas. The rim protection's great, but if you don't have everything else to go along with it, I mean, what good does it do you? So I don't think Toronto's letting him go anyway after acquiring him mid-season. Final one, because a number of you have mentioned this, and I don't know if you're joking or not, and I think some of you are and some of you aren't. And it's not technically a sign and trade. They could actually use this with cap space or with the mid-level exception. Let's just shoot this idea down now. Do you know who I'm about to say? Dwight Howard. I'm lumping him in here because he's a named player. He's done in the NBA. He's done in the NBA. And if you want a little funny story, about a year ago, he was playing somewhere else. And on Locked On NBA, me and John Corrales, who hosts Locked On Celtics, and we do this every Wednesday, did a segment of like, could he come back after dropping 30 points in the Philippines or like wherever he was playing? And the answer was like get out of here. No, that's not a thing. We do real or fake every Wednesday. It was like real or fake. Dwight Howard is an NBA future. And it was like fake, just screaming fake. And then he did this recently this season, like a couple weeks ago. And John and I, when we were planning out the show, he texted me. He's like, we could do real or fake on if Dwight Howard's coming back into the NBA. And he had completely forgotten that we had done that exact segment a year ago. And I like, we did this one already. It's like, oh yeah, we did. Yeah, shows you that he's not coming back to the NBA. So what about actual realistic options with the mid-level exception that's not a sign and trade, like a free agent, they go and they sign and don't need to give up assets for or anything like that? I got a couple of names for you, and I think Drew Eubanks, who might be the best option, and I'll explain why coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, completely free. No Locked On Pelicans Plus, no Locked On Pelicans Prime or anything like that. If you want to support the channel, become an everydayer. And if you are an everydayer, and a lot of you tell me, saw someone at the airport at like 6:30 in the morning who wanted to come up to me and tell me they're an everydayer, and like shout out to you, my man. I appreciate that. That was awesome. Everyone, let me know on Twitter, are you an everydayer? And I loved seeing all the people in the live show, and we'll get back to doing the live shows at least once a week, in a week or two, saying that you were an everydayer. That means a lot. That's why I'm here. I do the show for you and for your passion, and it's fun to see that. So support the channel and become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday and comment down below on YouTube. Who's your favorite of the guys I'm going to talk about next? Realistic not trade targets, free agent centers. And we're looking at centers, right? Because they addressed the guard position. They addressed kind of the wing with Jordan Hawkins in the draft. And there's just not a ton of minutes. If BI's healthy, if Herb Jones is healthy, if Trey Murphy is healthy, and you still have Najee and you don't trade him at some point, you have a lot of minutes at the wing. You have a guard rotation now of CJ, Jose, Dyson Daniels, Jordan Hawkins. Like, there's a lot of guards there too. I don't see where bringing in someone like that is someone who's going to crack the rotation at all. And there's Kyra in there too, and we haven't even mentioned him. So you're looking at a big man or a center, and it's really just a center. And so these names that I'm going to tell you aren't like sexy, fun names. I'm not going to put them in the title of a show, but they're actual realistic options and something that the Pelicans might do. And honestly, I think the best guy that they could get for dirt cheap might be Drew Eubanks. You remember him of Portland this past year, where New Orleans should have been going big and killing them. And Drew Eubanks instead like wrecked the Pelicans along with like everyone else. He is just an energy dude. Doesn't do much per game, right? 20 minutes per game, 6.6 points, 5.4 rebounds, 1.3 assists, and half a block. But when you get into his numbers, they're pretty good. Like they are. Sorry, he averaged this past year that was 0.5 steals. It was 1.3 blocks per game this season. When you look at his numbers, they're shockingly good. Let's start with the block percentage, right? You want rim protection. You want a guy that blocks shots. This past season, his block percentage was 5.7%. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. So that's an estimate of the percentage of opponent 2-point field goal attempts blocked by the player while they were on the floor. His career block percentage is 4.7. It's put that in perspective here. Brook Lopez's career block percentage is 4.9. It's barely better, 0.2 better. Now, that's misleading. That's misleading a little bit. Brook Lopez does it more minutes, does it against better competition, being, a starter, and is allowed to roam and do other things. But that tells you something. The problem with Drew Eubanks is he's undersized. He's 6'9", so he's a small ball center. Larry Nance Jr. is also about that size and has been a problem when the Pelicans close with him because they don't have enough size on the court. So I get your concern about him, but his rebounding percentage is shockingly okay for a dude his size. Is he elite? No. He's not an elite rebounder by any stretch, but can he go out and give you enough? Yeah. His rebounding percentage is in line with Larry Nance Jr.'s in terms of defensive rebounding, if not actually a little bit better than that. That's not enough to make you feel amazing about it, but he's an above average defensive rebounder that gives you the shot blocking you need and that can defend on the perimeter and in space. Is there some redundancy, some overlap with Larry Nance Jr.? Yeah, but think of it this way. In this scenario that we're talking about, for these actual, realistic, cheap options, you're also keeping Jonas Valanciunas. So it's not like, okay, we need to bring in one all-encompassing guy. Let's trade for Brook Lopez. Let's trade for Christian Wood, whatever. You are doing this to augment that and complement that and supplement that. So there's times when you just need rim protection. You don't need an offensive center out there. Put in Drew Eubanks. There's times when you need to go small and get a little bit more offense. Okay, Larry Nance Jr. You need Jonas Valanciunas to do Jonas Valanciunas things and just mash on the boards. Keep him out there. I think it gives you the option to use whatever you need. You have a bunch of tools here, and as the saying goes, pick the right tool for the job. Not the wrong one and try and force it. That's how you round nuts. I've done that, and then you have to order new parts, and it creates a whole other problem when you work on cars. So it just gives them an option, right? They didn't have a shot blocker. They didn't have someone that could do some of those things and play defense like that in close games when they needed to. Maybe you want to rely on Larry Nance Jr., but what if you're like, wait, no, we need more rim protection. They're getting there. We need someone to kind of go and alter shots and block shots. Could that be Drew Eubanks instead? Maybe. Even if you don't use him, it's not like this guy's going to cost much more than the veteran minimum, more than $5 million, let's say. Fits right within the Pelicans' likely budget for things. Some of the other realistic options, look, maybe you can go get Cody Zeller. I think the Miami Heat will do what they can to re-sign him. They played him a lot. They shouldn't have played him that many minutes, but they did. Okay, I don't hate that idea. You've heard me talk about Mason Plumlee, who's more of a rebounder than a shot blocker, rim protector. That's more if you get rid of Jonas Valanciunas and you don't move him for another center. I think you bring in Mason Plumlee to be your spot starter, like starter in name only. So when you start to look at it, I think Drew Eubanks is a realistic option for New Orleans. Just an energy guy that I feel like would fit right in, block some shots, do his job, and then you get him out of there and go with the other center that you need, kind of based on the matchup and what's going on in the game. Let me know. Do you like the idea of Drew Eubanks as the Pelicans' big free agent name? People will freak out, and I understand it, and I get it when they were hoping for something bigger, because essentially at that point, if you sign Drew Eubanks, you're running it back, right? You added Jordan Hawkins, you added Drew Eubanks, you're running it back. Because they're not going to be massively impactful guys this season, even if they're getting minutes. Hawkins might, and we'll look more at that probably in tomorrow's show. And it's not a sexy big name. He doesn't feel like a difference maker like a Brook Lopez would be. Brook Lopez, by the way, 35 and missed. He was good last season. The year before that, he basically missed the entire season with a back injury. I don't know if they need more injury-ish guys with all of that. So let me know what you think about Drew Eubanks, Brook Lopez, any of the other names. I know there's going to be some of y'all saying Christian Wood in there. No. And tomorrow we'll talk more Jordan Hawkins, more Pelicans off-season. I'm looking forward to it. So thank you all so much for listening. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.